This episode's made possible by Planful.
Hi, this is Anna Chadwick, Executive Vice President as CFO at Pitney Bowes, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 951.
Here's what will happen. Here's what you always hear. Hey, I generated 100, S1s. And S1s, consider those things sales accepted leads. And yet we missed the number. It must be a sales execution problem. And then the sales guys will say, wait a minute, we accepted these leads, but they were incredibly unqualified. So the leads are bad. And so you got to get out of that finger pointing world into one where you're a true partnership. We're aligned around the overall Arkose objectives of growth and profitability, and all together are getting compensated that way. And then we're all actively involved. So we get together as a team. And as I've said, the mantra in that function for me and my team, since I joined, was this is the Arkose number, not the sales number, not the marketing number. It's our number. And so how do we all collectively support that?
Hi, it's Jack. On today's episode, we speak to CFO Frank Teruel of Arkose Labs. For a dozen years or more, Frank Teruel has professionally been leading a double life. And when he stepped into a CFO role at Arkose Labs last February, it was just the latest of a succession of CFO roles that required Teruel to align his C-suite responsibilities with a Santa Clara University classroom. Inside the classroom, Professor Teruel is known to speak quickly while he keeps discussions lively and interesting by injecting real-world knowledge into his latest lessons. So pull up a chair and learn how CFO Teruel is helping Arkose Labs open a new chapter of growth. We'll begin after this.
Hi, I'm Rowan Tonkin, Chief Marketing Officer at Planful, and we're a proud sponsor of CFO Thought Leader. At Planful, we're empowering teams just like yours to drive peak financial performance in every corner of your business. What sets Planful apart? We have purpose-built applications for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. This means we can get you up and running within weeks, and it requires minimal IT involvement. So you can rapidly and seamlessly engage everyone across the business in your key financial processes. Best of all, you can't outgrow us. We take the pain of growing away with an unmatched ability to scale with you. You have an endless runway with Planful. See why over 1,300 customers around the world choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Go to planful.com and see how you can make financial performance a team sport in your business.
Hello, we're speaking to Frank Teruel, CFO of Arkose Labs. Frank, welcome.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
So, Frank, as always, we're going to begin by asking you to look back and share some of those experiences you feel prepared you to become a finance leader. What comes to mind?
It's such a great question. So let me give you the story around this. I'm sitting in Toronto, Canada. I had gotten a job with Pricewaterhouse. I'm on the 71st floor of this banking tower downtown. It's December 18th or something. We're in a transaction, and I'm a fourth year guy. And I look outside. It was so funny. I look outside, and I realize it's around 11. The last GO train to get me home, I lived in Mississauga, which was just down the road, was coming at midnight, and it was minus 30. And I had to go from the office to the train station, catch the last train home. And it was a seminal moment for me because I realized, you know what? I got to get out of Toronto. I got to get myself. And just then, ironically, this was the early 90s, the technology practice for the firm was just starting to grow in San Jose. Never heard of San Jose. I knew they had a hockey team, big hockey fan from Canada, obviously. So I literally just said, I'm moving. And I went to the firm. I said, I'm going to go join the San Jose office. And the seminal part of preparing me with career was really that moment where I came to this office and was introduced for the first time to the startup issues. The stuff we dealt with in Toronto were big banks and big conglomerates and big companies, which, by the way, was phenomenal from an experience perspective, because you have massive diversity, right? I'm working on a bank one day, I'm working on a real estate developer the next day. But when I came to San Jose in 1994 on that transition, I was just struck with, number one, hey, it's February and it's 70 degrees, which was just, that was it. The whole trip was worth it. But then shortly thereafter, I realized the formation of capital here with, tons of money, a penchant for risk taking, and great talent was creating this environment that I really thrived in. So for me, that was the pivotal moment. Went from the big, back then, Big 10 public accounting firms, having a great career there, jumping into the startup world. And shortly thereafter, I left to become my first finance role. Once I became a manager at the firm, I bailed into startups. But that was really a dichotomy in terms of the types of customers and experience, but at the same time, an eye-opener. So I'm like, oh my gosh, this is such a thriving, dynamic business. And that was really the impetus for getting me into the world I am today. A few years later, I started to realize where I wanted to live was software. That's, the high margin, right, business versus the low margin, volume hardware businesses that the firm was working at the time, or semiconductors or whatever it was. And that really led me to start to focus my career on what's really the important part for not just me as a finance guy, but as a business person. Where's the market with the greatest TAM that I could see? And I thought software, and specifically cybersecurity in those early days, was the place to be, and kind of vectored my career that way. I've been in cybersecurity probably for the last 25 years. So that journey started back there. It started, kind of in a weird way, got me to California, just really escaping the cold. And then ultimately wound up in Silicon Valley. So kind of a weird journey, but that's how it happened.
The finance leader who came in from the cold.
It.
That was the. But no, just for some of our listeners who might reside in accounting houses today, you're up in Canada and you want to head west, and you had connected with a number of senior managers or partners who, were saying, we should make this happen for Frank. What was or how did it happen?
No, without a doubt. Look, one of the things I think that I take away, I have a mentoring group called the Millennium Mentorship Group, Jack will talk about later, but every Friday for the last 15 years, we've gotten together as a team. And these are people that worked for me or have somehow associated with me. And we get on this Zoom call, and first in person, now in Zoom. But part of that was, I realized the importance of networking, and I didn't articulate it as that back then. I just knew, wow, these guys are big, important people at the firm. I want to be on their jobs, and so I really tried to get on jobs with, partners that were doing high-profile stuff. And by the way, I'm going to date myself, along with my, high school friend Lincoln. I'm going to go back a ways, but when I was at the firm, that whole issue with, the real estate market crashing in Olympia, New York, and all these big companies, those were amazing. The Bank of Credit and Commerce, where that was one of my accounts when the whole crisis happened and they shut it down. It was really interesting. So I tried to vector into accounts where you had like high profile partners. And then what really happened, I think, is just a confluence of good timing and luck. The firm was trying to build a Silicon Valley practice, and it was just a handful of people when I joined, not a lot of people here. And they were just starving for talent. So to some degree, it was super important to have those partners that would vouch for me. But at the same time, there was huge demand. They just had to get people into this practice. It was starting to boom. And, for most people, the idea, Jack, of uprooting from the East Coast, heading west, that's a big deal, right? I had 2 kids at the time. I went home and said, Rhonda, I think we should go to California. She was as frozen as I was. She's like, let's go, right? So we got it done. And we wound up there. But I think that reliance on, building those relationships with those partners to the point where they at least trusted you enough for what you knew at the time. Obviously, they had no idea where I was going to go. But for what I knew at the time, they said, yeah, this guy can fit the bill. And then also the great timing. It just wound up being, a circumstance of, wow, they needed people and I was willing to step up. So I got there pretty quick. We had the conversations kind of in November, December with the partner here in Silicon Valley. And I was there by February, which was pretty remarkable.
It's the end of the 90s, and you've jumped into Silicon Valley companies. At that point, you're building your career in industry. It's the dot-com craze. You could have joined a dot-com. Maybe you did. But you had these opportunities to really get, the options and everything those .coms promised. Now we know it all comes crashing down, but why not? Why didn't you go that way?
Well, interestingly, I was in a company called Telepost, Jack, which was a unified messaging company. So it was a .com-ish company. Had investment from from a lot of big people, and it didn't get quite caught up in it because it was acquired just before the bubble burst, right? So I was kind of in one, and then I realized quickly, right around that time frame, I go, what I'm looking for, like everybody else, for at least a moment in time, was security. So yeah, there was a lot of opportunity to jump in, and the jobs were abundant and plentiful. But I tried to ease off the gas a bit and go pick a good one because there was so much carnage, as you know. Everybody was overnight. Plus, we had 9/11 hit. I mean, we had the implosion. Then we had this massive issue in our country, this horrible tragedy, and then the beginning of the war on terror and everything that followed after that. It was just a really difficult time. So I started looking at, where can I leverage, what people at that time I expected would want, which was more reliance on solid financial kind of people, right? A lot of the .com bubble was really, slideware and money, right? If I can tell a good story, I'm going to raise cash, and those chickens came home to roost. So now I think for me, it was really about there were opportunities, but I wanted to ease into it. And then really, that's really the kind of the beginning, Jack, of thinking about where do I want this career to go in terms of domain. And I really was focused on access control and cyber. And so as I started thinking about, wow, the internet's coming on, people are going to have to know who's on it. If you think of it this way, today, only two things ever really matter online, right? Is Frank really Frank? And is Frank behaving normally in the context of this transaction? Those are the only two things that matter. So that opens up an entire possibility of, well, how do I know Frank is Frank? So access controls, identity resolution, making sure that geolocation makes sense. All those things were really important. And in the early days, not a lot of that existed, right? So I really pivoted from this kind of unified messaging company that today would have been known as a WebEx or a Zoom. We were way early back then. Went through some financial services stuff because people really needed financial assistance. And then slowly vectored my career, culminating, by the way, in a fantastic job at a company called Vormetric, which was a company that was specifically focused on encryption and access control at a very robust level. And it had fantastic customers, the three-letter agencies in the government, a lot of the big enterprises. And that was really my first foray as a finance executive into cyber. And then that stuck. I mean, I loved it. I got the bug, and that really led to it. So
Can I ask? Yeah. Can I ask, how did you become a CFO? You had an opportunity somewhere. You came in as a director of finance or a VP of finance, and either the CFO left. I think maybe you had an interim role, and then you got the title, and then when you went on to the next one, you became a CFO.
Yeah, it was Vormetric. I mean, I came in as VP of finance, and as the company grew and the needs of that role grew, I kind of grew into that role. I mean, it was just, I wish I could say it was skill. It wasn't. It was just, I was there, had demonstrated some competencies, and as the role grew more expansive, I kind of grew into that role. So it was I was their VP of finance. They had no CFO. So we literally went VP of finance, and then I grew into the role. Ironically, in that role, I also had the ability to function as the VP of worldwide services. So I was involved in both customer facing and, finance work, which, by the way, really formed my opinion of CFOs very differently, Jack. I started thinking, you cannot be an effective finance leader if you don't understand the product, how people use it, and really understand the marketplace. So that foray into professional services and customer success and support really helped frame my view of what a CFO really should be, right? Really think of it as a chief business officer, someone that understands a lot of domains, has really deep financial domain, but at the same time is able to be customer focused, understands the product journey, understands continued product market fit and all those things that matter. So that was it. I mean, I literally just eased into it because the company grew, and they go, hey, this guy's cutting the mustard, so keep him.
You invested about 4.5 years at Vormetric. Curious, was it? It wasn't a public. It was a privately held firm. Is that right?
Private company.
Was there aspirations to go public someday, or?
I think those were the aspirations for everybody back then, and I think the reality, having now lived part of my career in a public company, as you've gone through this cycle, you realize the enormity of the execution risk associated with public companies, which is really why M&A is such an interesting option for most companies, right? No execution risk. You build a company with great value, and based on your profitability and growth, you get great multiples, and away you go. But no, that really what happened there was, it literally, I spent 4.5 years there, and I got a really weird opportunity to go work running an e-commerce website effectively, right? I got a job at a company that was selling a lot of art and stuff, and they needed help building an e-commerce kind of presence on the web. And I thought that would be a great skill set for me to learn. How do you sell stuff online? And so I did it for you there. But Vormetric really was that first angle into growing into the CFO role, dealing with investors, understanding the marketplace, dealing with customers. And I got to tell you, it's interesting. It was a very interesting experience for me, very rewarding. Again, remember the war on terror. There's a connection here. A lot of the work we were doing was supporting the military and supporting the three-letter agencies. And so we had a very strong government business at that company. And really we're doing some amazing work in the green zone and other areas where our technology was being deployed. And so I had a great opportunity to meet a lot of people in that world that were in the middle of a fight, as we know. And we really provided great value. We provided them an acceleration of data that they could keep in country without risk of compromise. So there was a real interesting mission element to what we did. It was also pretty cool. So that was a very big growth opportunity for me, not just in terms of CFO, but in the broader sense in how to deal with the non-civilian side of government. How do you deal with the marketplace, really getting deep in the technology? All of that came together at that role.
Along the way, in other companies, you've been a COO as well. Is the operations side of the business something you were always comfortable with as well, or was that a sort of a learning experience?
I think it's both. I think you ease your way into it. I mean, becoming an operator really is a function ultimately of how much experience, how much shrapnel do you have in you, right, from all the stuff you've blown up. But I believe today fundamentally you cannot be an effective CFO unless you have deep operational domain. You just can't do it. I mean, in one of the litmus tests, for example, Jack, that I use in dealing with companies when we're building our e-staff is you really cannot be a member of e-staff unless you can contribute outside of your domain. If all I can do is walk into an e-staff and talk about customer success or the financials or InfoSec, and I can't contribute more broadly, then I'm still at the VP level. I'm not really ready for the exec level. So I think there's a huge confluence between being an effective financial leader or chief business officer, if you will, and also being an operator. I think those two things go hand in glove. And certainly that's been my experience in probably the last 15 years. That's really been a focal point of, I don't know how you don't do both and become very operational.
Well, Frank, we might have a few more career-related questions for you a little later in the podcast, but right now let's find out about Arkose Labs. What was this opportunity that you saw here? What does this company do, really?
So going back to the concept I said earlier, Jack, of online only two things ever matter. Is Frank really Frank, and is Frank behaving normally in the context of this transaction? Given the enormity of data breaches that are out there, and as a result of that, the innumerable amount of data elements about you and me, as we know, bots have taken off. And so for robots that take credentials and stuff them places or try to manipulate text flows or SMS flows, all those kinds of things. So what Arkose does is we stop volumetric bot attacks. So we focus on crime as a service companies that are renting out bots to adversaries, and then those people are using those bots in a volumetric way, millions and millions of times a day, for example, to try to infiltrate accounts, to take over accounts, again, to make money off of SMS flows. And so our mission is to stop volumetric attacks. We have fantastic customers, everybody from OpenAI to X to Microsoft to banks. I mean, you name it, an enviable list of customers that use us today. And we stop volumetric attacks. We stop human-based attacks, sometimes these human fraud farms. We have technology that helps us identify that. And by extension, we have a super strong detection and challenge technology. So when you show up at a website, if you're legit, you'll never see us. And you show up at a website and you're not legit, or we suspect you're not legit, then you go through a bunch of challenges. And at our mission are three things. Number one, really the idea of making the cost of intrusion expensive. So our technology challenges these models in a way where they're just not profitable for the adversary. Number two, to help our customers harden their targets by giving them all the data that we collect. Here's what we're seeing. Here's the vectors you should worry about, and use that information. And then number three, by helping our customers when they apply real world consequences. So if you're an organization and you're going after the bad guy and you need our data and technology to prove that there was an attack or a vector, we work on that. So 5-year-old company, great startup, funded by some fantastic folks. Again, we're on a high growth journey. And we really do provide, people the ability to transact the digital economy safely, because we are stopping bots, stopping human fraud farms, and allowing customers to proceed on their journey without risk. So exciting company, small company, but exciting, global. And as I said, just an envy of customers that we're very, very proud to partner with.
No, very, very interesting. Curious as to its capital structure history. Could you give us maybe an abbreviated history of its capital structure?
Yeah, look, we've been very capital efficient. We've raised 3 rounds. U.S. Venture Partners is a great venture firm in the Valley. They led our first round. Microsoft led number 2. SoftBank number 3. Very strong capitalization. Microsoft, or I should say, Wells Fargo's in the deal. PayPal's in the deal. Sony's in the deal. And we've raised 3 rounds and won't need to raise any more. We'll be, we're on a goal to be a Rule of 40 company next year, and we're on our way to do that, which is, in the financial world is super critical. How do I get that rarefied air valuation that goes along with, the 40 number? So we've been capital efficient. We've got a good solid war chest of cash, and we have fantastic board members, both the independent board members, people like Reed Taussig and Chris Cabrera, who've got very storied careers in the Valley, plus our venture partners and strategic partners. So very, very solid round, ABC, and we don't think we'll need a D. We're growing nicely, so best place to be, right? And not just as a financial person, but as a shareholder. You look at it and you go, wow, I've got an equity valuation here that isn't pegged to some unicorn valuation. So the equity has the opportunity to really provide value to the shareholders. So excited to be there, and a super clean stack. I mean, very, very clean.
You arrive first quarter, February of this year. What is the chapter that you're opening here? And is the chapter how Frank made it IPO ready? Or tell us what the chapter might be.
Yeah, look, I had 2 objectives when I joined. Number 1, to grow this business to scale. We're on a path to try to get to 100 million in ARR. We're headed that direction. So how do you put together both the people, the processes, and the mentality to really grow this thing to scale? That's number 1. And then number 2, how do we bring together a wealth of people with a wealth of experience, I should say, to help us sell into industries that we're all accustomed to? Our major focus this coming year and next year is not just sell lookalikes, obviously the industries we're in, but also get deeply into the financial services industry. So many of us now at the E-staff level are people that have long, deep roots in financial services. And how do we help sell that? So scale the business, focus on the right industries, build all the procedures and processes and mechanics and measurements to be able to get us to that point.
So can you share with us, as you look down on it's real early here, you're not even 12 months, but in terms of the people piece of it and the systems piece of it, what's happening? What do you got in motion?
So on the people side, we've got some fantastic folks we've brought in around mechanizing processes and making them more efficient. So I'll give you an example. One of that, we've established a deal desk. Many companies have deal desks, but our deal desk focuses on really 3 things. Number 1, orchestrating deals, partnering with the sales team, doing sales operations in partnership to enable better deals. What do I mean by that? Price, the right kind of price orientation, the right kind of, adjustments and things we can do to do a deal when they're not optimal, or maybe they're not the way we'd like to see them. So a very legitimate, organized deal desk. Concentration of vendor management in that negotiating team. A lot of areas where startups get jammed up, especially on cash burn, is every department has contractors and vendors and everything else all over the map, right? So how do you create one unified vendor management motion where internally that same deal desk that negotiates customer contracts also manages and negotiates vendor contracts? Now you've got that discipline built in of making sure we have best-in-class vendors, best available terms, and we're kind of rotating the supply chain, keeping it honest. That's number 1. Then the third thing these guys do, and it's really kind of something I expect from all of my directs, is being able to be customer focused, right? So when they go on a sales call, they're dealing directly with the customer along with their sales colleagues. They have deep, demonstrable deep domain, so they can speak not just to the deal mechanics, but also to the use case and other things. So that front's going very well. Very, very good people. We've obviously invested in finance, had some really great folks there. We've unified sales operations into one function, which has been important. Another thing we've done, Jack, that's really important is to really think of the go-to-market muscle as one team. Too many companies operate in the world of, I've got sales, I've got marketing, I've got sales enablement as 3 different camps, and then I've got customer success as something else. And we've really focused on how do we bring these 3 teams together into one motion, right? So, it's our number. It's not the sales number. It's our lead. It's not the marketing lead. How do you really create that ownership across that movement? And then how do you fund that in a way where you're getting the optimal return on your investment in terms of the marketing programs and dollars, headcount for sales, those kinds of things. So we've done a really good job and really up leveling, that kind of muscle and motion. So look, 9 months in, feeling really good about that as well. And that's demonstrably, made clear in just pipeline growth. We're probably grown our pipeline 4x what it was when I joined, which has been really, really cool. So I'd say on the scale part, we're making progress. I've got a term of art that I use called escape velocity. You'll find, Jack, I'm a space nut. And so I always tell our team, I'm looking for escape velocity. That's, for us, it's probably a couple of years out when we really hit that massive growth curve and we're funding the right kind of growth. And so how do you build to get there? And that's the process we're in. So early days in, feeling really good about the team, feeling good about the process, feeling even better about the product. I mean, our Gartner surveys give us consistently the highest score in the industry. Customer success metrics are fantastic. We have a fantastic leader named Patrice who runs our success team, and he's just done a remarkable job in kind of engendering that kind of customer success perspective. And so really proud of the customers we have. Like any good CFO, minimize churn, eliminate contraction. That's one of the core. You protect the core of the business. And the key to that, the tip of the spear for that is that go-to-market muscle, including customer success. So really focused. That was one of my prior objectives coming in. How do we protect the core? What's our core business? Who are the customers? And how do we do everything we can to ensure that contraction is limited, churn is eliminated, and growth is amplified? That's kind of the way I think about that.
You touched on something I think a lot of finance leaders could relate to, which is the go-to-market one team. How do you make everyone understand that they all own certain numbers? That's not just a sales number. That's not just a customer success number. That's all of our numbers. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you did, steps you took to better, and maybe it just begins in a conference room, how you discuss these things with the whole team present or represented, or maybe there's a way of displaying information that suddenly you're educating the organization more broadly to appreciate the fact that what was just achieved is a win for you, but it's also a win for you. And I don't know, but I'm trying to, is there something you did to display the numbers or educate the team better?
Well, two things, Jack. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. First and foremost, the whole idea of do a trick, get a cookie. Tie everything to compensation, right? So we literally aligned the entire E-staff, not just CMO and CRO and customer success, but the entire E-staff is tied to the company number. So you don't have a CMO, for example, that's making his money off how many S1s he produces, right? Because there's no connection or attribution to actual revenue when you do that. So we said, look, the way you're going to get paid is we have a growth number, we have a profitability number, and we're going to be aligned to that as a team. So everybody shares equally. Now, obviously, the objection always is, well, I don't control that. Well, you really do control it, because to your point number two, if you're a marketing individual, aligning around the fact that, look, measuring the number of leads that come in is interesting. Measuring how much revenue gets closed is what matters. And so building that connection, and we started here literally a committee. It's me as the CFO. It's the CRO and the CMO. We meet once a week, and we literally go through that issue of how many of our deals have gone from leads to POVs, which is how we predominantly sell, and measuring POV conversion together, and then how we interact together, how we fund things together, how we travel together, how we speak together has been issues. So I think there was like most startups, there's obviously kind of a barrier between those two functions. And I've kind of facilitated every single week. We get together, we review what's happening, obviously in advance of the broader forecast call, just the three execs getting together saying what's working and what isn't. This is our number. Oh, by the way, lest you forget, your compensation is tied to one overall goal. And I think that alignment is so critical, because so often they'll go, what are you talking about? Here's what will happen. Here's what you always hear. Hey, I generated 100, S1s. And S1s, consider those things sales accepted leads. And yet we missed the number. It must be a sales execution problem. And then the sales guys will say, wait a minute, we accepted these leads, but they were incredibly unqualified. So the leads are bad. And so you got to get out of that finger pointing world into one where you're a true partnership. We're aligned around the overall Arkose objectives of growth and profitability, and all together are getting compensated that way. And then we're all actively involved. So we get together as a team. We've eliminated the 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 kind of the commentary that's negative, or someone's that lead wasn't any good. We just don't talk that way. And as I've said, the mantra in that function for me and my team since I joined was, this is the Arkose number, not the sales number, not the marketing number. It's our number. And so how do we all collectively support that? Similar to that, we built 3 motions in the business. I consolidated customer, kind of corporate services into one group. These are the folks that support the go-to-market motion. And then we build an engineering and product kind of motion. So that global development team builds the stuff, the go-to-market sells that we support. And when you think of it in those kind of 3 groups and align everybody around the notion that we're all going to be successful when each of those groups is supporting the go-to-market effort, I think that's pretty powerful. And we've seen good success so far.
Are you becoming, if we had asked you 5 years ago, do you believe in more transparency today than you did then? And by that, I mean sharing more numbers more broadly, making more numbers available, or maybe it's not always a good idea. And again, CFOs are not one, group on this.
Yeah.
Where are you on the transparency? Are you a champion? Are you with limits? I don't know.
I lean toward champions, but definitely limits. Obviously, there's some things you can't talk about. As it relates to the go-to-market function, everybody should know what we're up against. Who are we working with? What are we doing? Who's doing what to who? Obviously, there's some things on the investor and people ops side you can't talk about, but I'm a big champion that the more you give them, the better. However, I do believe that the function of all of us is to be predictive, not be historians or journalists. And I think that's been one of the Achilles heels of finance for way too long. You may see that from my resume or from my LinkedIn, but I've been an adjunct at Santa Clara University in the MBA program for almost 12 years. And one of the things I always tell my students is, finance has always been almost inherently a journalistic function, right? Hey, we lost money this quarter. Hey, we made money this quarter. And in reality, we want to pay people to see around corners, not to report the past, right? The past is important. The through line and the trends are more important. So I think in that sense, we're really focused on sharing information that has a predictive nature to it, so people can draw the right inferences from it, as opposed to just a bunch of information with no context. So you'll find me leaning towards the champion bit with limits and context, right? And obviously, when I can't share something, I'm very transparent with folks. I was recently at our Costa Rica office. When I travel to our global groups, I always do kind of a round table or a town hall meeting at each of those meetings. And oftentimes I'll be asked something where I'll just say, I can't talk to you about that. But here's the other stuff I can't talk about. So I think the days of not sharing information, those are done. But I think sharing with the right context and the right level is definitely a plus.
Well, I want to touch on AI with you. It seems like the nature of this business, you folks would be a little clued in as to how powerful the forces of AI can be, good and bad. You tell us about the types of conversations you folks are having regarding AI and how it'll impact this business, perhaps.
This is a tip of the spear issue for us. First of all, there's a dynamism to this marketplace that's amazing. I mean, I think the LLMs and the language and media learning models are phenomenal. They're being deployed everywhere. We all know, that Copilot will be out as part of the Microsoft suite coming out in a month or so. And what it's going to do is, it's inherently, from an operational perspective, it's a force multiplier. How can I use this technology to help do things that before were manually intensive? At the tip of the spear where Arkose lives, we're doing 2 things. And by the way, we're delighted. I think I mentioned earlier, OpenAI is now one of our major customers. We won that deal a few months ago. And that partnership really is about how do we use our technology to ensure that their accounts aren't being scraped and overtaken, those kinds of things. But at the same time, now that we're close to it, how do we use AI to make sure AI is not used as a countermeasure to all the cybersecurity stuff, right? So we're seeing a lot of stuff. And I'll give you some ideas of how the world will change. Not that long ago, people would say to you, well, passwords are dead and biometrics are everything, right? And so they would say things like, your face and voice and liveness tests. I was at a company that actually did that. Face and voice and liveness can't be compromised. Well, we know that's not true anymore because it doesn't take too long. I don't need too many of your words, Jack, to be able to script a Jack or a deep fake that's profoundly believable, right? And so the issue becomes, how do I begin to use AI and to find out how, on this constantly moving thing, how do I make intrusion more difficult? How do I make success more difficult for the adversary? Again, from our perspective, from the theme of they just give up because it's too expensive to get in. And we're seeing a lot. Obviously, a lot we can't talk about by virtue of those relationships, but think of 3 dynamics in our industry that are operative. Number one, You have the traditional advanced persistent threat actors. So, the Far East actors, nation states antagonistic to our interests, all those people are still active and now much more effective because they use, this computing power and the AI. In addition to that, you've got crime, what I call crime as a service, which really is if you're on Telegram or if you're on, you name it, Discord, you pick your channel, you can go out there and for not a lot of crypto, rent some bots. You have a how-to video and away you go. You can become a fraudster, which leads to the third component in this industry called DIY fraud, right? Do it yourself. I mean, I don't need to be an expert anymore or a hacker to figure this out. Those three things, advanced persistent threats, crime as a service, and the availability of data that allows people to come in, when you now filter that into something like, like AI, and you go, hey, AI, as you come up with these challenges, solve them for me. That is very, very, very troubling for people that haven't got the right posture and protocols in place. So we're working on how do you make sure that AI is not used as a way to countermand or counteract those cybersecurity measures. Pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, thank you for that. We are up to what we refer to as our finance strategic moment, and we're looking for one moment of strategic insight that you've experienced along your long career. And it might have happened last week, or it might have happened 10 or 20 years ago. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Look, I think obviously all of our careers, Jack, yours included, are shaped by these seminal moments that do that. So we've had M&As, made money, which has been great. We've had failures, which you learn from. But I think to me, what was most shocking, I think most of us in the Valley would agree, was the failure of SVB last year. Earlier this year, I should say. That was such a shocking moment. I'll give you a story around that because I wish we were this smart, but we were just pretty lucky, right? So I get a call one morning from my good friend Damian Henriksen, who runs our deal desk and sales operations. He's a former security guy, and he goes, "Hey, SVB's stock is way down." And so I call our VP of finance. I go, "Hey, what's going on? Have you heard anything?" And he goes, "I haven't heard anything, but I can't get into the portal." This was 2 days before it crashed. So I said, "I don't know what's going on," but we got together and we started moving money to our subs, fund payroll, pay for vendors. And fortunately, 2 days later, when the thing went sideways, we really weren't that exposed. We had taken steps to make sure that we weren't exposed. Not because we thought it would implode, but we thought it's weird. The portal's not working. Weird things happen. So here's my takeaway. Number one, we had this unbelievable financial institution that had been really integral to the formation of Silicon Valley all the way back to Silicon Valley's inception. I mean, SVB's been there, has been my bank so many times in my career. It's been unbelievable. And to watch that organization fail so quickly was an eye-opener. And what it did for us is to really start thinking about, how do you guardrail and start measuring the financial health of some of your supply chain partners, even though they're behemoths, right? And so to me, it was a real eye-opener how quickly that thing failed, the impact of that failure. Fortunately, we weren't as exposed and we got out of it, but the impact on taxpayers, the impact on all of us associated with that is something I'll be candid with you. I never thought I would see something like that happen as a financial executive. And if you would ask any of us 2 years ago on where our money was, anybody in the Valley goes, Silicon Valley Bank. I mean, they're the entrepreneur bank, they're the investor bank. And I think that to me, all the other moments are important. The M&As, the transactions, all that's interesting. But the realization of how dependent we are on our supply chain for some critical functions and making sure that you diversify that risk is critical. What's come out of it? We have banking relationships now where we don't anymore ever agree to 100% of our deposits or transactions in one institution. You just can't do it because who knows, right? So that carnage this year, Jack, was just, I think, the eye-opener that I never expected. It's been a real interesting moment. I talk about it to my students now to go, hey.
It had to happen within 30 days of your arrival there.
30 days, And
Yeah.
Here's this interesting, Jack. We got a war room together on that Friday morning. And the first thing that came to mind was we need to call all of our customers and tell them not to send checks. So imagine that. So you're a customer, you get a call and you go, hey, don't send the check. The first thing is it's a phishing attack. They're trying to redirect to another bank account. It took us probably 4 months to get that organized. And fortunately, we had the capital to be able to survive that because your DSO went through the roof. I mean, nobody's paying anything. Everybody goes, I don't know where to pay it. Is it legit? Is it not legit? So that whole anti-phishing exercise of actually talking to our customers at this CFO to CFO level or CFO to head of payment to say, this isn't a joke. This just happened. This is our new bank account. Those were some of the spin-off effects of that. Obviously, to the degree that you had facilities you were relying on, bank lines and revolvers, that went away. So I think to me, it's still very fresh, very painful. And still, as I look back as a financial institution and the impact on us as financial folks and business in general, it was shocking from two perspectives. One, that there would be that degree of impact from bad decisions internally. And number two, the velocity at which it failed.
From episode 930, this is 1 Minute with Tony Bohr, CFO of Blackbaud.
One of my common themes I've used for years and always push on my team and on the company is the phrase of simplify, standardize, and automate. And so that's just a mantra that we've used, and it's continual, right? Just anything you have that you're working on day to day, how can I simplify this? How can I standardize it? How can I automate it? And so AI is not really new to us. It's just another, arrow in the quiver per se, and some new tools that we're going to be looking to employ wherever we can within our infrastructure.
Thank you for that. We're going to jump to our mentoring round where we'll ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. We want you to think back, and it was probably back at Vermetric, or the first time you stepped into the CFO role, and you had the responsibilities really come down on you, and you wish someone had told you this. Or maybe you could go back in time and just give this piece of advice to yourself, knowing who you were then, what you didn't know, what you knew. What is it that you would tell yourself?
Look, if I were to go back as a CFO, early days, I'd say, Frank, get deep in the product. Understand how your customers use this. Understand their product journey, because that'll inform yours. And out of that comes all your investment decisions, everything you're going to do to go to market. I think, again, I said earlier, Jack, too many CFOs in the early days are journalists. They focus on results. Here's what we did. And what really matters is, great, we did this, but what's, again, seeing around corners. Where's the market headed? What are we doing? If I could go back and talk to myself, I'd say you need to understand to be predictive. Get to know the product, understand the marketplace, and be predictive. Get the tools and measurements you need to be able to do that. That's number one. Number two, I learned this at Vermetric because I was deeply involved for the first time in fundraising. But, oftentimes you'll hear it's the CEO's job to make sure the company never runs out of money. Actually, it's the CFO's job. So that's the other thing, is create the relationships outside of the existing syndicate that will allow you to bring to bear capital as needed for the eventuality that something will happen. Something's going to go wrong. It's always twice as hard as you thought. It's going to take twice as long as you thought. And so those kind of real life stories that you've lived over time, to go back and say, build the kind of banking and capital relationships outside of the syndicate, because from a shareholder perspective, the syndicate will give you money all day long. It's just, at what value. So build those relationships, understand how and why your customers buy, understand how your information helps you make better decisions within that context. I think that begins to put finance at the tip of the spear in terms of the go-to-market motion, and also as the steward of capital, where you go, hey, I'm not going to wait for the CEO to kind of say we have to raise money. We're going to be looking at, hey, we're going to, based on things taking twice as long and be twice as hard, here's what I think. And oh, by the way, here's a group of folks that may help us in that endeavor. Those are two things I would think. The other thing that's interesting, and this is one I share, Jack, with my students constantly, I had the privilege at Price Waterhouse of just dealing with some amazing people. I guess, it's a fantastic firm. And back then I networked with the partners that I was working for. I didn't realize the people I was rubbing shoulders with. I'll give you an example. I remember having dinner. I'm a punk kid, right? I'm out of school. What do I know, right? I'm 1 year out. And TD Bank is one of my customers. And I get invited to the year-end dinner, and sitting two people away from me is the CEO of Toronto Dominion Bank. I mean, that's rarefied air. I just didn't know it back then, right? And so the idea of, man, you got to rub shoulders with some people that were really incredible, industry influencers and luminaries and really titans. And realizing, shake that hand, get to know that person, just keep in touch every once in a while. Back then it was Lotus Notes, so it wasn't as elegant as it was today. But I think that recognize the network that you're interacting with and the power of that network over time becomes really popular, not to drive your career, but just to learn. I mean, I'm having dinner next to a guy that's been running, a highly regulated top 20 global bank. And I'm a year out of school. You know what I mean? Like that just doesn't happen. So I think going back and saying when you're given those opportunities, make the most of them, right? In a humble way. Don't be cocky, but hey, I'm on the team. It's been great to know you, and then ping that person. Ever since then, over the years, I've really gone out of my way to really reach out to folks I've worked with in the past. But in those early years, I wish I had thought of that.
And
right?
at the same
I
time,
really hadn't.
you go back to the classroom. You like to teach. What does that what does that reveal about
Yeah.
us that you spend this time in the classroom as well over the years?
Jack, I'm going to say something. It's not intended to be pejorative. So I'm not maligning schools. But what I found in education was I could have read the book at home and taken the test, right? And what happened years ago is I got the opportunity to teach, and I realized what people are really hungry for. It's the phrase I used earlier. Hey, I laid a minefield and rolled around in it. Don't do it, right? And so here's the bad stuff, or here's the good stuff, and here's the real world experience element to it. And so what I bring to Santa Clara is really a focus on Silicon Valley, obviously, and on the new technologies and emerging trends and so forth. But also, here's what's actually happening in the world today. It's not in your textbook yet because the textbook's 2 years behind. But here's how we do deals. Here's what matters. Here's all of a sudden why everybody's gone from growth at all costs to profitability and growth. Those things don't get enough airtime when you're teaching class. So what led me to it is I realized I got a chance to speak to it, and I did my first quarter, and I really focused almost the entire quarter on the book says this and that's important, but here's what I'm facing, and that was very well received, and then I just stuck. I mean, it's just it's great to get back. I tell you what the unintended blessing or upside of that is. Over the years, I've probably had the chance to hire 20 plus of my students in different functions. Many of them still work for me today. Many of them are at Arkose, where I've just brought them from other deals, and those are people that I met as students. They were going through their MBAs. And when they graduated, we had a chance to collaborate. And they're all exceptional executives and leaders in their own right. And now I learned from them as much as the other way around. But it's been the unintended consequence of that teaching is, again, back to networking, just interacting with some incredibly bright people that go on to do great things. And you've got that mutual shared connection experience that I've met in the classroom. So that's pretty cool. I enjoy it.
What is one thing most people don't know about you? Something out there, and I see some musical instruments on the wall. I don't know.
Let me turn the musical instruments. So this is a test. I call this my wall of shame. These are all instruments I played in my life, just never well. All right. So when I was a kid, my mom insisted I play the piano. My mother, at that time, and I think she was right. In her mind, if you learn how to play piano or you learn music, you'd be good at math. And she was right, because ultimately it is math. The scales, the way we do things. So I played the piano all the way through from grade school on. When I got to middle school, in a complete act of rebellion, because my mom and dad said, you got to join the band. And I go, Pops, I can't imagine a worse fate than joining a band. If you're trying to be cool, you're going to put me in the band. And so they said, you're joining the band. And so I went to the band teacher and I said, hey, I don't want to be here. My parents are forcing me to. What's the instrument furthest away from a piano? And he goes, a trumpet. Well, obviously he needed a trumpet player, and I was too dumb to figure it out. So I played trumpet through middle school and high school. In high school, our trombone player quit, and because I had learned piano, I could read bass clef and treble clef. Trombone's a bass clef instrument. So, and I had the embouchure from the trumpet. They said, congratulations, you're the new trombone player. And a guitar is self-taught. And then here's a really cool one. This one's interesting. So again, back to that mentoring group I do. Last Christmas, they sent me a present. They sent me a banjo. We've been talking about difficulty learning instruments, and so the team got together. There's like 15 of them, and they bought me this banjo, and they said, learn to play the banjo. And that is brutal. I mean, I'm trying, but it's brutal. No. So that's the hall. Really, that's the hall of or the wall of shame. Over on the left, you may be able to see it over my left shoulder, is all my Spartan races. Another thing about me, my wife and I run Spartan races. I run it with our companies as well. I've done 12 of them. Our 13th is coming up November 5th. So I really like to be active. But here's the thing I'm most proud of. I am a young granddad. My 3 kids are all grown. They're all thriving in their careers, and they all have kids. And so pride and joy is hanging with those little guys. And that's it. That's the thing that I'm most proud of, is just time with those guys.
What about a book selection for us? Doesn't have to be a business book. Might be something you escape with. Anything?
I'll give you two books, really 3 books that are phenomenal. So I'm reading The Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell right now. And if you're a Gladwell fan, and Gladwell's really good at things. We all know Outliers, we all know things like that. But the Bomber Mafia is this really interesting reflection on the kind of dichotomy in the bombing teams in World War II, from the carpet bombers to the precision bombers, and how the American philosophy was we're going to build technology and instruments for precision bombing, so we eliminate collateral and focus on infrastructure. Versus in World War II, there was just this penchant for bomb everything, because you'll eventually hit something. And so that's been a really interesting book, because it reflects on the kind of the confluence of technology and how it was used, and then things they didn't understand. Like, one of the things that's interesting in that book, Jack, is they're trying to get this instrument down. The bomber would lie flat and would look down, and this technology was supposed to predict when to drop the bombs. They didn't know about jet streams back then, and so these planes are flying 200 knots faster than they thought, because you'll eventually hit something. And so that's been a really interesting book, because it reflects on the kind of the confluence of technology and how it was used, and then things they didn't understand. Like, one of the things that's interesting in that book, Jack, is they're trying to get this instrument down. The bomber would lie flat and would look down, and this technology was supposed to predict when to drop the bombs. They didn't know about jet streams back then, and so these planes are flying 200 knots faster than they thought, and they missed everything. So that's interesting. It's a departure for Gladwell from his typical stuff. That's really interesting. Another great book. It's called Race to the Moon. Again, I told you I'm a space nut. I love all things space, but it's really the history of the American space program from the end of World War II all the way up through the end of the Apollo missions. And that's a fantastic book in the sense that it chronicles the space program, but it also tells you the pragmatism. I mean, we took a bunch of really bad people from World War II and made them rocket scientists and built the program on that. It really dives into some of the human flaws of our astronauts and some of those things that happen there. So that's a really good book. And then one that I recommend that's really disturbing, actually. Netflix has just done a series on it, but it's disturbing because of the outcome. It's called Ordinary Men. And Ordinary Men is the story of a German police battalion that's deployed to Poland as MPs ostensibly, and becomes one of the most vile, killing machines that the SS had. And the author goes through, how did these guys that were plumbers, carpenters, bakers, 1 week, a month later, become these prolific killing machines? So it's disturbing. It's disturbing in terms of the atrocities committed, but it asks a very interesting question. When given the chance to do right, and they were, by the way, why didn't anybody take it? And it's a really interesting book on just psychology. Netflix has put out a series on it that's just, riveting. Yeah. But I recommend that. Very, very interesting. By the way, none of those to do with business. Just really interesting.
Some provocative thinking there. So thank you for those. We are up to our final question, where we're going to ask you to look forward finally. We want to know what your priorities are as a CFO over the next 12 months. What are the priorities?
Number one is succession. I'm at a point, I've been blessed with a lot of great success over the years. I've got a fantastic team. My job today is to make sure that, when my time comes to depart, there's absolutely no impact on this business. And so I've got some great partners across the various functions that I oversee and over which I preside, that my job is to mentor them up. Everything from, better communication and more executive presence and more domain expertise and just friendships in general. So number one, as I look forward, is getting that succession to the place where I'm imparting on them, here's what not to do, and then they can figure out the right things to do, helping them with that. Number two, guiding our company into an unbelievably cool future. I mean, I think if you begin to think of one of the impacts of AI is the ability to interface with the digital world without a visual interface. And in that context, solving those two questions I talked about, is Frank really Frank and is Frank behaving normally in the context of this transaction? Doing that in a way that's gonna use tomorrow's challenges, tomorrow's technologies. Imagine this world, and we're starting to see it, Jack, but the only thing that's not spoofable is an unknown future command, right? So if you and I had never met, and you're about to send a wire through B of A to Venezuela, and we go, definitely the right guy, oh my gosh, this is going to Venezuela, this is weird. And I were to say to you as a bank, I obviously can't see you, but I were to say to you, I know your device, your connected devices in your home. If this is really you, turn off your microphone. That's pretty powerful. I mean, it's just so the future of how do you do authentication, identity resolution, and challenges in a non-visual world in a way that reduces friction and absolutely adds an element of authenticity. Only that mic could be at your house, and nobody would know I'd give you that command, so it's very hard to spoof. I think that's really cool. And then obviously the last thing, as I think about the future, is continue to pour into the next generation of leaders to get them spun up as they come out of these programs, not just with head knowledge, but with operational know-how, right? Here's as I said, here's the minefield not to lay. And if you do lay it, don't roll around in it, right? It's okay to pivot. It's okay to walk away. It's okay to reevaluate and be agile in your thinking. Don't auger into something just because you started it. So that teaching side to me is really, I think, is if I were to look at what do I really want to focus on in terms of developing next generation leaders, that's it. Just really getting that team spun up.
Frank Teruel, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Awesome. Good to be here.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.